Sometimes the cruelest betrayal is not the affair itself, but watching another woman were the only proof that you were ever truly loved. Snow drifted softly beyond the towering glass walls of the Aspen Crest Lodge, covering the mountains in silver silence while America's wealthiest energy moguls toasted beneath chandeliers that looked like frozen stars. Inside the ballroom, everything shimmered with power. Crystal champagne flutes, black tuxedos tailored on Fifth Avenue, diamonds bright enough to blind a room already filled with people who had spent their entire lives pretending they could not feel anything at all. And standing near the marble staircase in a floor-length black velvet gown, Zarel Vaughn looked like the calm center of a storm no one else could see coming. The emerald necklace resting against Seraphine Vale's pale skin caught the candlelight first. Then it caught Zarel's soul. Her breathing stopped so quietly no one noticed. Not the senators near the fireplace. Not the investors laughing beside the orchestra. Not even Callum Vayner, the billionaire husband currently standing beside his mistress with one hand casually tucked into his pocket like the entire world belonged to him. The necklace had once belonged to Zarel's grandmother, a woman born in Louisiana in 1942 who cleaned hotel rooms during the day and taught piano lessons at night just to keep her daughters fed. Emeralds surrounded by tiny diamonds. Old family craftsmanship. Quiet elegance. Generational survival stitched into gold. Callum knew that story because Zarel had once whispered it to him during a thunderstorm in their first apartment back in Detroit, when they still split rent 3 ways and dreamed over takeout Chinese food at 2 in the morning. Back then he used to kiss her hands like they were sacred. Back then he still looked at her like love meant something more than ownership. Seraphine laughed softly as another photographer asked for pictures. The necklace sparkled against her ivory dress. Callum says vintage pieces deserve to be seen, she said with a polished smile that belonged on magazine covers and nowhere near another woman's history. A few guests chuckled. Politely, someone raised another toast. Across the ballroom, the jazz quartet continued playing as though the universe itself had rehearsed this humiliation in advance. But Zarel did not cry. That was the terrifying part. She simply lifted her champagne glass and took one slow sip. Controlled, measured, elegant. The kind of silence that changes destinies. Callum finally noticed her watching. For half a second, guilt flickered across his face before arrogance buried it alive. He started walking toward her, confidence smooth as aged whiskey. Z, he murmured quietly once he reached her side. Don't make a scene tonight. Her eyes moved back to the necklace, then slowly back to him. You gave her my grandmother's emeralds. Callum exhaled impatiently. It's jewelry. Zarel's expression never changed. No, she said softly. It was memory. Somewhere behind them, snow pressed harder against the glass. And in that exact moment, although no one in the ballroom understood it yet, a billionaire had already begun losing his empire. If you're listening to this tonight from a quiet apartment, a late-night drive, or maybe while the world sleeps around you, tell me where you are and what time it is where your heart is hearing this story. Sometimes strangers understand our silence better than the people who promised they always would. The orchestra continued playing long after the moment should have shattered her. That was the strange thing about wealthy rooms in America. They knew how to survive discomfort by pretending elegance mattered more than truth. Zarel stood near the grand staircase while waiters drifted through the ballroom, carrying silver trays of champagne and truffle canapes worth more than most families spent on groceries in a week. Outside, Aspen disappeared beneath thick snowfall. Inside, Callum Vayner's empire glowed gold beneath crystal light, and every inch of it had traces of her fingerprints hidden inside the walls. 8 years earlier, before private jets and magazine covers and billion-dollar energy conferences, there had only been a cramped 600-square-foot apartment above an auto repair shop in Detroit. The radiator barely worked. During winter, snow pushed through the corners of the old windows. They ate instant ramen at a folding table because they could not afford real furniture yet. But every night, Callum would spread contracts and blueprints across the floor while Zarel sat beside him wearing thick socks and oversized sweatshirts, reading energy regulations until sunrise. She had graduated top of her class in environmental law while working double shifts at a downtown legal clinic. Callum had vision, but Zarel understood systems. She understood policy, tax credits, land rights, federal loopholes, the invisible architecture behind American wealth. She was the one who discovered the abandoned lithium corridor in West Texas that eventually became the foundation of Vayner Green Energy. She was the one who convinced skeptical investors that clean energy was not charity. It was power waiting to happen. But cameras never pointed toward women like Zarel Vaughn. Especially not women with deep brown skin and quiet voices who preferred strategy over spotlight. By the time Forbes started calling Callum the new king of renewable energy, the world had already rewritten history. Interviews happened without her. Magazine covers cropped her into the background. At galas, people smiled politely and assumed she was simply the elegant wife standing beside success instead of the woman who had helped build it with her bare hands. At first, Callum used to correct them. "My wife is the smartest person in the room," he would say proudly. Back then he still reached for her hand under tables. Back then he still looked exhausted without her near him. But success changes some men slowly, then all at once. The first private jet. The first billion-dollar valuation. The first young assistant who laughed too hard at his jokes. Somewhere between ambition and applause, Callum stopped introducing Zarel as his partner. She became decorative, predictable, quiet. Tonight proved he had finally made the mistake powerful men always make when the world starts worshiping them. He believed silence meant weakness. Across the ballroom, Seraphine tilted her champagne glass, while photographers circled her like moths. Around gold light, the emerald necklace flashed again beneath the chandeliers. Callum noticed Zarel watching and straightened his tuxedo instinctively, as though confidence alone could hold together what had already begun collapsing beneath his feet. But Zarel only smiled faintly. Cold. Controlled. The kind of smile that does not belong to heartbreak anymore. It belongs to calculation. By 10:30 that night, the snowfall had buried most of Aspen beneath nearly 8 inches of white silence. But inside the Crest Lodge ballroom, the air still smelled of expensive perfume, whiskey aged longer than some marriages, and the dangerous confidence of people who believed money protected them from consequences. Callum stood near the center stage speaking with investors from San Francisco, while giant digital screens behind him displayed projections for Vayner Green Energy's newest lithium expansion across Nevada. Every number climbing upward, every applause line perfectly rehearsed. And beside him, Seraphine glowed beneath camera flashes as though she had always belonged there. Zarel watched from the edge of the room with one hand wrapped around her champagne flute, her expression unreadable beneath the soft amber lighting. A violinist played somewhere near the balcony. The music sounded distant now, almost underwater. Mrs. Vayner, an older woman, approached carefully beside her, wrapped in a silver fur shawl worth more than most American homes. "Senator Holloway's wife. I just wanted to say how proud you must be tonight." Zarel smiled politely. "That is very kind." The woman lowered her voice. "You know how men are once success reaches this level. Sometimes they lose themselves trying to impress people who never loved them to begin with." For the first time all evening, something flickered in Zarel's eyes. Not pain. Recognition. Before she could respond, applause erupted across the ballroom. Callum had stepped onto the stage holding a crystal glass high enough to command every eye in the room. His tuxedo fit perfectly. His smile looked practiced now instead of real. "Tonight," he announced smoothly, "is not just about business growth. It is about evolution, reinvention, new beginnings." More applause followed instantly because wealthy people in rooms like this always applauded before understanding what they were clapping for. Seraphine moved closer to the stage, emeralds glowing against her throat like stolen royalty. Callum extended his hand toward her. Cameras immediately turned. "To the future," he said softly, looking directly at Seraphine while the room watched. The silence that followed felt sharper than any scream. Zarel did not move, but something inside her finally settled into certainty. Around her, whispers began spreading carefully beneath the music. Investors exchanging glances. Socialites pretending not to stare. Nobody said the words affair out loud because the wealthy preferred cruelty wrapped in elegance. But humiliation still sounded the same in every language. Callum finally searched the crowd for his wife. Their eyes met across the ballroom. For one suspended moment, the years between Detroit and Aspen seemed to collapse entirely. She remembered cold mornings, sharing one winter coat between them. She remembered him promising, with tears in his tired eyes, that if he ever became powerful he would spend the rest of his life protecting the woman who believed in him before the world did. And now here he stood offering her family history to another woman like a trophy purchased from a jewelry store. Zarel slowly set her untouched champagne glass onto a passing silver tray. Calm, precise, beautifully controlled. Then she turned toward the ballroom exit without a single word. Several guests noticed immediately. One investor stopped mid-conversation. Another lowered his drink. Because somewhere deep beneath all the polished wealth and political smiles, everyone in that room suddenly felt the same thing. The queen was leaving the empire behind. And somehow, the empire already looked colder without her in it. The cold hit differently once she stepped outside the ballroom. Aspen's midnight air sliced through silk and diamonds without mercy, carrying the sharp scent of pine trees and snow across the mountainside, while luxury SUVs lined the circular driveway like polished monuments to American excess. Valets rushed beneath heat lamps. Chauffeurs opened doors for senators and executives still laughing about stock prices and ski resorts as though nothing important had just happened upstairs. But Zarel Vaughn walked through the falling snow alone, her black velvet gown trailing softly behind her like the final page of a love story, finally reaching its ending. She did not rush. Powerful women rarely do. Inside the lodge, music still echoed faintly through the walls. Somewhere above her, Callum was probably smiling for cameras beside the woman wearing her family's history around her neck. The thought should have destroyed her. Instead, it clarified everything. The driver opened the back door of the matte black Escalade waiting near the entrance. "Back to the estate, Mrs. Vayner," he asked gently. Zarel paused before answering. Snowflakes settled against her dark curls, disappearing almost instantly beneath the warmth of her skin. "No," she said quietly. "Take Highway 82 East." The driver hesitated only a second before nodding. The vehicle glided away from the glowing lodge and descended through the snow-covered roads winding around the Rockies. Aspen disappeared slowly behind them, reduced to scattered golden lights swallowed by white darkness. Inside the car, silence wrapped around her like another layer of winter. Zarel removed her wedding ring first. A flawless oval diamond Callum had designed himself after their second year of marriage, back when he still believed love should feel personal instead of performative. She turned the ring once between her fingers before placing it carefully inside the leather compartment beside her. Then came the phone. 23 unread messages already waited on the screen. Investors, socialites, public relations executives. One message from Callum. "You left without saying goodbye." Zarel stared at the words for several seconds before locking the screen again. Outside the tinted windows, snow continued falling across abandoned gas stations, frozen rivers, and dark stretches of Colorado highway where nobody cared about billion-dollar companies or elegant affairs. It reminded her of Detroit, of who she had been, before wealth turned love into theater. 3 hours later, the Escalade stopped beside a private airfield outside Denver where a sleek charcoal jet waited beneath floodlights glowing against the storm. The pilot stepped forward immediately. "Good evening, Ms. Vaughn." Not Mrs. Vayner. Ms. Vaughn. Strange how one word could feel like oxygen after years underwater. Zarel climbed the narrow jet stairs slowly, one gloved hand brushing the cold railing while snow swirled around her heels. Before entering, she looked back once toward the dark horizon where Aspen slept beneath ice and privilege and lies. Then she reached into her clutch purse and removed a small silver key card embossed with the Vayner Green Energy logo. The master authorization key. Access to every financial layer beneath the empire Callum believed belonged entirely to him now. Her thumb rested over the metal for one long, quiet moment. Calm, certain, unshaking. Somewhere deep inside the storm gathering over the mountains, a woman stopped grieving her marriage and started remembering her power. The private jet landed in Dallas just before dawn, when the Texas sky still carried that deep blue silence that exists only in the few fragile moments before sunrise. Rain had replaced the Colorado snow now, sliding gently across the runway lights while the city waited in the distance beneath low clouds and sleepless skyscrapers. Zarel stepped onto the tarmac wearing the same black velvet gown from Aspen, though somewhere during the flight it had stopped looking like evening wear and started looking like armor. A Blacktown car waited beside the terminal. No photographers, no assistants, no headlines, just quiet. Exactly what she needed. 40 minutes later, The car rolled through the wrought iron gates of a historic estate tucked behind towering live oak trees in Highland Park. The house belonged to Alden Pierce, the attorney who had once spent 20 years protecting her grandfather's land rights across Louisiana and East Texas before retiring from corporate law entirely. He had known Zarel since she was 16 years old, back when she still wore thrift store blazers and carried legal textbooks twice her size. He opened the door himself before she even reached the front steps. His silver hair looked untouched by sleep. "I was wondering how long it would take before you came home to yourself," he said softly. Those words nearly broke her more than the betrayal ever had. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedarwood, old books, and fresh coffee. No marble excess. No billionaire performance. Just history. Alden led her into his private library where floor-to-ceiling shelves surrounded a massive walnut desk covered in legal folders and handwritten notes. Rain tapped quietly against the windows while a fire crackled low beside them. For the first time in years, Zarel finally exhaled completely. Alden studied her carefully over the rim of his glasses. "Does Callum know?" She removed the silver authorization key from her purse and placed it onto the desk between them. "No," she answered calmly. "He stopped paying attention long before he stopped loving me." Alden nodded once. Not surprised. Never surprised. Then he opened the top drawer of his desk and withdrew a thick leather file stamped with a faded gold seal. Vaughn Family Trust. Zarel's heartbeat slowed instantly. She had not seen the file in nearly a decade. "Your grandmother instructed me to release this only if your marriage ever became a threat to your dignity," Alden said quietly. "Not your happiness. Your dignity." He slid the documents toward her carefully. "There is a difference." Outside, thunder rolled softly across Dallas while Zarel opened the file with steady hands. Page after page revealed signatures, acquisitions, mineral rights, silent ownership structures hidden beneath shell corporations, and generational trusts. Her grandmother had never trusted wealth that depended entirely on men. So years earlier, while Callum believed he was building Vayner green energy from ambition alone, the land beneath several of the company's largest lithium operations had quietly been secured through trusts legally tied to Zarel Vaughn. Not Callum. Not the board. Her. She stared down at the final ownership chart while rain shimmered against the dark windows behind her. 51% controlling. Interest through layered trust protections. Enough to remove a chief executive officer entirely if she ever chose to. Alden folded his hands slowly. "Your grandmother once told me something after meeting Callum for the first time," he said. "She said he had the eyes of a man who would either build cathedrals or eventually worship himself inside them." Silence settled heavily across the room. Zarel closed the file with measured precision. Somewhere thousands of miles away, Callum Vayner was probably still standing beneath chandeliers believing his empire belonged to him. Believing the woman he betrayed would disappear quietly into heartbreak like so many women before her. But the storm gathering now was not emotional. It was legal, financial, surgical. And as dawn finally broke across the Dallas skyline, Zarel Vaughn looked out through the rain with calm eyes and understood something powerful men never seem to learn until it is far too late. The woman they underestimate is usually the one holding the final signature. 6 months later, Houston moved beneath summer heat and glass ambition, while the annual American Energy Future Summit transformed the downtown convention center into a battlefield disguised as elegance. Oil executives in custom Italian suits drifted through marble corridors beside politicians, venture capitalists, and media personalities chasing the next billion-dollar headline. Giant digital screens displayed clean energy projections, while champagne flowed beneath ceilings tall enough to make everyone feel smaller than their own egos. And at exactly 7:15 that evening, every conversation inside the main ballroom stopped at once. Zarel Vaughn had arrived. She stepped through the entrance wearing a fitted black silk suit with emerald cufflinks that caught the light each time she moved. No dramatic jewelry. No entourage. No attempt to prove anything. Her dark curls rested neatly against one shoulder, while the sharp elegance of her presence seemed to silence the entire room more effectively than any microphone ever could. 6 months ago, people had whispered about her as the abandoned wife of a billionaire. Tonight, nobody used Callum's name when speaking about her anymore. Now they called her something else entirely. The woman who quietly acquired 3 renewable infrastructure firms in under 90 days. The strategist who rebuilt failing energy grids across underserved Texas communities without a single press interview. The investor whose private foundation had just funded scholarships for young Black women entering environmental law programs across the South. Power looked different on Zarel now. It no longer asked to be recognized. Across the ballroom, cameras immediately turned toward her arrival while executives adjusted their posture instinctively. Sensing influenced the way animals sense storms before rain arrives. A reporter from CNBC whispered urgently into her headset. "That is Zarel Vaughn. Get the cameras moving now." Near the center stage, Callum Vayner stood frozen beside a group of investors from California. For one suspended second, he forgot every prepared sentence he had practiced for tonight's keynote address. Because the woman walking toward the ballroom did not resemble the quiet wife he had dismissed in Aspen. This version of Zarel carried herself differently. Slower, colder, like someone who had survived the fire and discovered she no longer feared the flames. Seraphine noticed him staring immediately. Jealousy tightened her smile beneath layers of expensive makeup and media perfection. "She really knows how to make an entrance," she muttered quietly. But Callum barely heard her. His eyes remained locked on Zarel as memory collided painfully against reality. Detroit winters. Shared coffee cups at sunrise. Her laughter filling tiny apartments before success poisoned simplicity. He suddenly realized something horrifying. This was the first time in years he had truly looked at his wife without distraction. And somehow the entire world had noticed her brilliance before he did again. Zarel stopped near the main investor table, where several executives immediately rose to greet her. "Ms. Vaughn," one of them said warmly, extending his hand with visible respect. "Your Dallas solar acquisition changed the entire market projection." Another smiled. "We have been hoping to meet you in person." Not one person asked about Callum. Not one person mentioned the marriage. Because rooms like this only worshipped power, and tonight power had shifted quietly across the floor without warning. Callum finally moved toward her through the crowd, tension visible beneath the sharp lines of his tuxedo. "Zarel." Her eyes lifted calmly to meet his. No anger, no longing. Somehow that hurt him more. "Callum," she answered politely. Formal now, distant. Like speaking to a businessman she once knew rather than the man who had once memorized every scar on her heart. He lowered his voice carefully. "You disappeared." A faint smile touched her lips. "No," she said softly. "I stopped standing in places where I was invisible." The words landed harder than public humiliation ever could. Around them, conversations slowly resumed beneath the golden ballroom lights while cameras continued flashing in the distance. But for Callum, the room suddenly felt unfamiliar. Because standing before him was the woman who had once built his empire quietly in the shadows, and he was only now beginning to understand what her silence had truly been worth. By 11:45 that night, Houston glittered beneath warm summer rain, while the top floor of the Halcyon Grand Hotel pulsed with wealth, politics, and the dangerous illusion that powerful men controlled every outcome around them. Inside the private executive lounge reserved for keynote speakers and major investors, Callum Vayner stood beside the panoramic windows overlooking the city skyline with a glass of bourbon untouched in his hand. Normally rooms like this energized him. Conversations about acquisitions, market expansion, billion-dollar forecasts drifting through low jazz music and crystal light. But tonight something felt wrong beneath the polished surface of everything. The energy had shifted the moment Zarel entered the summit hours earlier. He could feel it now in the way investors spoke to him more cautiously, in the way board members kept checking their phones between conversations, in the way whispers stopped whenever he approached. Across the room, Seraphine laughed loudly beside 2 social media executives from Los Angeles, but even her voice sounded artificial tonight. Forced, desperate, like someone trying to drown uncertainty beneath performance. Callum loosened his tie slightly and glanced again toward the city lights reflecting against the rain-soaked glass. Memories of Zarel kept returning against his will. Her calm eyes in the ballroom. The way she said invisible without raising her voice once. 6 months ago he would have dismissed it as emotional drama. Tonight it sounded like prophecy. At exactly 11:58, his chief financial officer rushed into the lounge pale enough to drain color from the entire room. "Callum," he said sharply, barely controlling his breathing. "We need to talk privately. Now." Every instinct inside Callum tightened instantly. They moved into a smaller conference suite adjacent to the lounge, where several board members already stood frozen around a glowing screen. Rain hammered harder against the windows now. The atmosphere felt cold despite the Texas heat outside. "What happened?" Callum demanded. Nobody answered immediately. Then the chief legal advisor slowly turned the monitor toward him. An official corporate transfer authorization filled the screen beneath federal verification seals and legal signatures. His heartbeat stopped. Vayner Green Energy controlling shares transferred through consolidated trust execution under Vaughn Holdings International. Effective immediately, 12 a.m. Central Time. Callum stared at the final signature at the bottom of the document, while silence swallowed the room whole. Zarel Vaughn. Calm handwriting. Elegant. Final. "This is impossible," one board member whispered. "How does she own majority control?" Another executive looked physically ill. These trusts were layered beneath the Nevada and Texas mineral acquisitions. They have been protected for years. Years. The word echoed through Callum like shattered glass. Suddenly, everything returned at once. Every contract Zarel reviewed personally. Every acquisition she insisted remain under separate legal structures. Every time he waved away her recommendations because he assumed loyalty meant permanence. He had spent years believing she stood quietly beside the empire while never realizing she had built the ground beneath it. His phone vibrated violently in his pocket. Then another message. And another. Financial media alerts exploding across every major network in America. Vayner Green Energy leadership under emergency restructuring. Vaughn Holdings assumes controlling interest. Market analysts stunned by overnight transfer. Across the conference table, one board member removed his glasses slowly and whispered the sentence nobody else had the courage to say aloud. "She just took the company." Callum finally looked up from the screen, his face drained of certainty for the first time in years. Somewhere above the storm-soaked Houston skyline, midnight had arrived quietly. No screaming, no revenge speech, no dramatic confrontation, just signatures, strategy, silence. The kind of power that does not need to announce itself because it already knows exactly what it is worth. And at that exact moment, while thunder rolled softly across Texas and stock prices shifted beneath sleeping cities, Callum Vayner realized the most devastating truth of all. Zarel had not destroyed his empire. She had simply stopped letting him pretend it belonged only to him. Rain followed Callum all the way back to Aspen 3 days later. Heavy, relentless. The kind of cold mountain rain that blurred headlights and turned luxury into loneliness. His private driver pulled through the iron gates of the estate just after midnight. But for the first time since buying the 12-bedroom property overlooking the Rockies, the house did not feel impressive. It felt hollow. Empty windows stared back at him like accusations while thunder rolled across the mountains beyond the pine trees. Inside, silence waited everywhere. No soft jazz drifting from the kitchen speakers. No candles glowing in the library where Zarel used to read legal briefs late into the night. No scent of her jasmine tea lingering in the halls. The mansion looked untouched, yet somehow lifeless without her presence anchoring it together. Callum loosened his soaked overcoat and walked slowly through the marble foyer while his footsteps echoed against the vaulted ceilings. Every room carried traces of her now that she was gone. The black piano she restored by hand during their second winter in Aspen. The framed photographs from community energy projects she funded quietly without media attention. The antique emerald vase from New Orleans that she once joked was older than most political marriages in Washington. He had lived surrounded by her love for years without understanding how much of the house breathed because of her. Upstairs, the master bedroom door stood half open. Callum froze when he noticed the closet lights were off. Zarel always left one light on at night. Always. Slowly, he stepped inside. Half the closet stood empty now. No black silk dresses. No winter coats. No emerald scarves folded perfectly by color the way she liked them arranged. Only clean white shelves remained beneath soft recessed lighting. Controlled absence. Intentional. Like she had erased herself from the room with surgical precision. A single envelope rested on the center of the bed. His name written across the front in her handwriting. Callum sat down slowly before opening it with unsteady fingers. Inside was the wedding ring she removed during the drive through Colorado months earlier. Nothing else. No angry letter. No dramatic accusation. Just the ring. Somehow that hurt more than hatred ever could. Downstairs, the front door suddenly opened and Seraphine entered laughing into her phone before stopping abruptly when she saw him sitting motionless in the upstairs hallway. "You disappeared from Houston," she said cautiously, removing her designer heels near the staircase. "The press has been insane since the takeover." Callum looked at her for a long moment. Really looked at her. The flawless makeup. The expensive clothes. The polished beauty that once felt exciting because it reflected status instead of intimacy. And for the first time, he understood something devastating. Seraphine had never built anything with him. She had only arrived after the empire already existed. Zarel was the woman who stood beside him before private jets and magazine covers and billion-dollar valuations. Before he learned how intoxicating applause could become. Seraphine walked closer carefully. "Callum." His voice came out quiet. "Exhausted. Do you know what the worst part is?" She frowned slightly. He stared down at the wedding ring resting in his palm beneath the dim hallway light. "She never once tried to embarrass me," he whispered. "Even after everything." Rain battered the windows harder outside, while silence settled heavily between them. Somewhere deep in the mountains surrounding Aspen, Callum finally understood the cost of confusing loyalty with permanence. And sitting alone inside a mansion too large for one soul to warm, a billionaire discovered that losing power was survivable, but losing the woman who loved him before he worshipped himself was the kind of poverty money could never repair. 3 months later, Alaska stretched endlessly beneath winter light, while ribbons of green aurora drifted across the midnight sky, like heaven itself had learned how to breathe in color. Snow covered the remote coastal village in soft silence as generators powered by Vaughan Renewable Initiative hummed steadily. For the first full week, the community had experienced uninterrupted electricity during winter. Children laughed outside beneath layers of oversized coats, while warm light glowed from homes that had spent decades depending on failing systems and forgotten promises. And standing near the frozen shoreline with her hands tucked into the pockets of a long ivory wool coat, Zarel Vaughn watched the northern lights dance across the horizon with calm eyes untouched by revenge. Reporters had tried for weeks to secure interviews after the takeover. Financial magazines called her the most powerful woman in renewable energy. Universities invited her to speak about leadership, resilience, and generational wealth. But none of those headlines mattered as much as this quiet moment beneath the Alaskan sky, where no cameras followed her and no one asked about Callum Vayner anymore. Because somewhere between heartbreak and reinvention, Zarel had stopped needing the world to witness her worth before believing in it herself. Her phone buzzed softly inside her coat pocket. One unread message. "Callum." She stared at the screen for several silent seconds before finally opening it. "I still wear the Detroit watch you bought me when we had nothing. I think that is the only honest thing left about me. No excuses. No manipulation. Just truth arriving too late." Snow drifted gently across the shoreline, while Zarel looked back toward the village lights glowing warmly against the dark. Then quietly, she locked the phone screen and slipped it back into her pocket without replying. Not out of hatred, not even out of anger. Some endings simply do not need another conversation. Above her, emerald light rippled across the heavens like her grandmother's necklace reborn inside the sky itself. And standing there beneath the aurora, surrounded by silence, dignity, and the life she rebuilt with her own hands, Zarel finally understood the difference between losing love and losing yourself trying to keep it. One had broken her heart. The other would have destroyed her soul. And somewhere far away in a mansion filled with expensive emptiness, a billionaire finally learned that the most valuable women are never the ones men show off to the world. They are the ones who quietly build worlds powerful enough to leave.